if I wanted to actually go collaborate on a document, if I wanted to go click on edit in Microsoft Word, it would basically die. It wouldn't know who I was and cause problems. And I think that's actually just with ADFS. But if you were basically using FBA, you have to turn off client integration. Kind of a drawback with it. They recently fixed that with Service Pack 2 for Office 2007, as well as either Vista SP2 for Vista or a hotfix for XP. But that allows you to then integrate in and have that Office integration once more.
Would that help with the double hop issue?
No. Unfortunately not. The double hop issue is more just kind of a Kerberos issue. If it's not available to push basically a token back to that other application, it won't be able to actually verify who you are internally.
So the only way to get around the double hop issue is
Kerberos or a persistent cookie that can be pushed in its place. So for one implementation, we ended up using a third-party product as our authentication scheme, which was forms-based but used a token that acted like Kerberos. Basically pass that back and forth so that you wouldn't get continually prompted.
What was the name of that product?
It's a little company down in Columbia, South Carolina. It's version 3.
Version 3?
Yeah. I think they go by CSI Outfitters as well. I think they got bought. But the product is called Enhanced Authentication.
Sorry?
Enhanced Authentication. Works like a champ. It's I like it a lot more than a lot of things Microsoft puts out, but that's just me. So again, authentication schemes, you've got to think about interoperability with other systems. So if you didn't want to bring in some other system that you hadn't SSO originally for, probably you're going to want to think about how am I going to do this with my architecture. One of my recent projects, I got to integrate CRM into SharePoint. That was pretty cool, but pretty odd and difficult because the way it was done was through a web service. Figuring out how the authentication was going back and forth, multiple domains became somewhat troublesome because we didn't really have a logical architecture of what the other domain looked like. Taxonomy-wise, how does it fit in? When I first heard of taxonomy in SharePoint, I kind of laughed and thought to myself, are they talking about the wild kingdom that I learned about in biology class in high school? Or are they talking about something different? Obviously, data taxonomies, as I've come to learn, are quite different and quite interesting. There's actually, for those of you that are using IBM products, IBM was doing a webcast today on taxonomies using FileMaker, which obviously it's a SharePoint, but kind of interesting to see where they map things out. So taxonomy, obviously, we even apply it to websites, the way things are laid out, more to help out our users figure out, am I going to something 5 levels deep, or am I going to something that's 2 levels deep? For any of you that have ever been on a Microsoft corporate network, which I don't know if you have or not, but it's pretty cool because they just use short names. They don't have the fully qualified domain names. So if I wanted to go to HR, I'd go to http://HR. If I wanted to go to finance, go to finance. If I wanted to go to some other web-enabled site, I'd go to the name of the site. I wouldn't actually have to go to ericharlan.com/sites/ping-pong/tables/ rackets. It would just be like a little short piece. But how does that really apply to SharePoint? What is that site taxonomy? Obviously, how things are laid out, many of you probably already know. You've got farms that have applications, that have collections of site collections, that have collections of sites, and managed pads, nested pads, a whole wrangle of things, all a reflection of that organization. A lot of the time, I'll go into an organization and they'll give us kind of an org chart of what things look like. We'll look at it and we'll go, well, that's interesting. How do you guys actually work functionally? A lot of the time, we'll find groups within an organization cross-collaborating. So we start looking at it from that perspective. How can we really identify their taxonomy and work for them rather than work through just their office and whatnot. And just kind of another vantage point, slices. So, as an example, SharePoint.monkey.org, I might have a root site and also work sites. The root site would have kind of a blog, search center, personal area, those are subsites underneath that root site. So I might have a ton of information up at the root site about SharePoint monkeys. Again, one of the things at TechEd that amazed me was they have these little flying monkeys, which I thought were really cool. I was hoping that Joel Wilson would bring back. Maybe he will. And then likewise, many of you are probably familiar with SharePoint. You go create a site collection, you see the /sites. You're like, huh, what if I wanted to make it /project, /org, /whatever? Well, you can have /work. Just a managed path, just something that helps kind of segregate things, partition things. Do you really need a taxonomy? How many of you guys work in an environment where it's 2 or 3 sites and everything's just kind of dumped in there? So what?
Come across a few.
Okay. The question does come up, why not just put everything in a single document library? Well, obviously, document library, they say it can hold 50,000 documents, I think. You go above 2,000, you start seeing degradation in performance if you don't index it on a certain value. And it's kind of a neat idea, but I don't really feel like hitting next page after each 100 documents. Likewise, I could just search for everything, right? I could just get Google Search Appliance, hook it in, use the web services. I could use Metallica. I could use Fast. I could just use SharePoint search. That's cool if it's working properly. But then again, what's the authoritative data source? What about permissions? As I mentioned, Eric might go in one day and just say, oh, I want to re-inherit. Well, if you have that site collection built out and that taxonomy built out and things are partitioned, hopefully that's not going to happen. Hopefully Shabib doesn't lose his permissions the next day and have to call the help desk and say, hey, give me my permissions back. I need to get this work done. I need to get this document out. So, as you all know, you can use SharePoint groups. You can use AD LDAP groups. You can use single users, kind of a mix of the three. It's your own choice. So, what's the bridge? Well, site collections, they basically hook in to bridge that logical architecture. Everything you've got inside a web application obviously is a partition or a bucket. And then inside of that, you've got the buckets of site collections, which sit inside your content databases, which come in handy as long as you've got it mapped out first and not trying to go in after the fact and move things around. Now, not to say Microsoft hasn't made it a little bit easier. The SharePoint Admin Toolkit version 3 has a batch site manager, so you can quickly, shouldn't say quickly, you can take a site or a site collection and move it from one content database to another. Very handy tool. Don't press IIS reset while you're working with it, otherwise you will have an orphan site, which is usually a fun thing to have to deal with after the fact, isn't it? Project plans. I'm planning my logical architecture and taxonomy. Probably want to do it first rather than after the fact. Microsoft, funny enough, they have a project plan out there for deploying SharePoint. It's got a couple hundred lines. For those of you that are big on project planning, more power to you. For those of you that like to have kind of a strong end that you run through and know the different pieces you need to hit, that's probably just as good as long as you know what you're doing. Nowhere really in Microsoft's project plan, funny enough, do they say define a logical architecture, define a taxonomy. They'll say it many times, hey, meet with stakeholders, get the requirements, build out these documents. They kind of gloss over their own thing, which kind of made me chuckle. But, again, I'll probably be handing a deck to Eric at the end anyway, so any of the links that are in here, feel free to go download any of the products that Microsoft's got out there, interesting to use in your own organizations. Considerations on that technical side. What's the system doing? How big is it going to be? Do I have petabytes of data, terabytes of data? Am I constrained to only 500 meg of data? And it's all web content management. Kind of a requirement to what am I going to actually work with and have to work with. How will it be accessed? So again, that forms-based authentication, is it going to have problems with client integration? Am I just using that NTLM, Kerberos ticket? What's the level of usage? Am I expecting to have timeouts on my front ends? Something to consider while you're building it out. Likewise, cross-domain solutions. Do I have forest trust that I have to be able to pass tickets across? Something you may consider. And kind of on the technical side, SQL mirroring or clustering, maybe it's not so important to your logical architecture, but it is nice to know so that you can at least scope. Hey, I've got these 500 gigabyte databases, and I've got 2 terabytes of space.